The one thing that Biden had to do is convince the American public that he was not an old man who was unfit for the job, and he not only didn't do that, he made it worse. He had a State of the Union address a few weeks ago where he was strong and vigorous and had good attack lines, and he just had a very, very bad night on a very, very big stage.
Peter Spiegel, U.S. Managing Editor of the Financial Times, is with me today to discuss, Peter, hi Peter, to discuss the debate, the U.S. elections, and was it a disaster?
Yeah. To sum it up, I don't think it could have gone any worse. I mean, as several people have said, the one thing that Biden had to do is convince the American public that he was not an old man who was unfit for the job, and he not only didn't do that, he made it worse. He had a State of the Union address a few weeks ago where he was strong and vigorous and had good attack lines, and he just had a very, very bad night on a very, very big stage. So it was, I don't think it could have gone any worse.
And the thing is that he wanted to do the debate. He wanted to do it so early. Before the U.S. elections. So was he so comfortable with himself? What happened, do you think?
Well, look, I think we don't know 100% yet. Our reporters are still reporting out a lot of what went on. I think a couple of things that are worth noting. When I first started watching it, I was reminded very much of the first debate in 1984 between Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale. And Reagan came out seeking re-election, and he was confused. He seemed too old, couldn't remember numbers and places and names. And everyone said, oh my God, Reagan's lost it. He's too old to be president. And Walter Mondale, who was had been vice president under Jimmy Carter, came out, and he was not that much younger, but he seemed much more vigorous and on top of it. And what happened during that session was they decided afterwards, let Reagan be Reagan. We had briefed him too much. We gave him too many numbers. He tried to grasp it. And you could see that with Biden early. He was trying to pull together numbers. He was trying to remember his attack lines. And he was just overscripted and was trying to reach into a list of things that anyone on a debate floor was going to have a problem with. And so I think they tried to overscript him and give him too much data at a time where he just needed to project. So there was that issue that I think was badly prepared. But look, we all have older relatives. And the fact of the matter is, particularly as people reach into their 80s, people have good nights and they have bad nights. And the night of the State of the Union address, he had a good night, and now it just seems like he had a bad night. And there's been some talk that he had a cold and he had a sore throat, but any of those excuses are just that, excuses. There is he looked bad. He's freaked out a lot of Democrats. He's freaked out a lot of Democrats who are Biden partisans, and there's a whole series of recriminations about what to do next.
Well, is there a possibility to replace him? I mean, can we replace him if he is now he has been voted? So if he doesn't want to resign, can they replace him?
Yes. So you've asked the key question. If he does not want to resign, he cannot be replaced. So we've gone through the primary process. He has delegates to the convention. They've been assigned to him and they're committed to him under Democratic Party rules. So unless he says, I free my delegates, go to the convention and decide who you want to pick, there's nothing in the rules that allows him to be pushed off. So all the decision now is in the hands of Joe Biden, which is why, no one is picking up the phone calling Jill Biden or Hunter Biden, but they're calling the next closest thing to family, which is the aides that are closest to him. Tom Donilon, Ron Klain, Chris Coons, senator from Delaware, a lot of these people who are sort of in the Biden inner circle who have been there for 30, 40, 50 years. And that seems to be the direction people are focusing on about who can get the word to Biden that it might be time to be George Washington and say, I'm going back to plowshares. The other dynamic that's worth watching is, again, a lot of people have raised this, is if you remember your American history, during the Watergate scandal, it was Republicans on Capitol Hill, particularly Barry Goldwater, who was a leading Senate Republican who had run for president famously against Lyndon Johnson in 1968, who went to the White House and said, "Mr. President, the equivalent would be a Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi or Jim Clyburn, a congressman from South Carolina who's been very influential in helping endorse Biden and getting him elected. Do you see those party grandees go to the White House and say it's time?" So there's two or three avenues: the family, the inner circle, or the political grandees. And I think that's where everyone's watching right now.
Well, and the second issue is, okay, even if he resigns, do the Democrats have another candidate? I mean, that
well,
was
this is the thing, which I've always been arguing. The Democrats
from the beginning, Peter, wasn't it?
No, I disagree. I 100% disagree. The problem has been the exact opposite. The Democrats have a very strong bench. I can name 4 or 5 governors who would be much better presidential candidates than Joe Biden. Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan. Gavin Newsom, governor of California. Roy Cooper, governor of North Carolina. Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky. You know, if you are following American politics, this is like Bill Clinton in 1991. No one knew who he was. And then a year later becomes president of the United States. There is a very, very strong bench of leading Democrats, even in the cabinet. Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, former governor of Rhode Island. They may not be internationally known names, but in American politics, they are very strong candidates, particularly if you look at Whitmer in Michigan. First of all, a woman. But second of all, winning consistently in a swing state, which has gone increasingly Republican. She's very popular in Michigan. Beshear in Kentucky and Cooper in North Carolina. Those are 2 Republican states where they've won as Democrats. So you have people who have succeeded in winning in red states or in swing states that would be very credible candidates. And let's not forget the vice president. I know she's very unpopular, but forget that she was a very successful attorney general in California. She was a very successful senator and ran a very tough campaign against Biden himself in 2016. That's how she got the vice presidential nomination. So I would disagree with your premise. I think there is a very, very strong bench. The problem, to be honest with you, will be the opposite, which is if Biden steps away, does he anoint someone? And if not, you have half dozen people who make credible arguments. Does it become a free-for-all? And this has always been the Democratic Party's biggest fear, because if you remember back again your history, both 1968, famously, when Lyndon Johnson surprised the party and didn't seek re-election, there was a huge fight at the convention over who the nominee would be. Hubert Humphrey didn't win until like 3 o'clock in the morning. He gave his speech to no one because the hall was empty and primetime television was off. Same thing happened to Jimmy Carter in his re-election battle. He won the nomination, but Ted Kennedy had run against him and would not shake his hand. It was a bit of embarrassment. So the convention was a mess. Those are historic examples. And I was talking to one of our reporters today. I'm like, if we had a convention where there was an open contest, do those historical examples carry weight? Because actually in the current environment, it might be kind of a fun reality show. People might tune in to see the Democrats fight. And I wonder if the Democrats, out of fear of repeating 1968 and 1980, might be worried about a brokered convention when actually it could be the best thing that ever happened to the party to see their best people on stage and debating and fighting and everyone tuning in 24-hour cable news and Twitter and whatnot could really energize the party. But the first things first, we have to wait to see what Joe Biden does. Does he spend the weekend reflecting and deciding to A, stay the course, or B, it's time to bow out? I think we'll probably know that within the next 48, 72 hours.
Now, what about Donald Trump? He said a lot of lies. He's also 78 years old. So what can we expect there? And also for the Republicans, I mean, to have again Donald Trump, that was also something that someone couldn't think that could happen again. And with the trials and everything.
Look, if it hadn't been for Biden's horrific performance, it wasn't like Trump had a particularly good night. He started out strong, but then was rambling, was back defending the January 6th insurrection, claiming they didn't have. I mean, God, who would have thought on a presidential debate floor we'd have one candidate talking about, no, I didn't have sex with a porn star. I mean, it boggles the mind what we've now accepted as mainstream political dialogue. And the fact of the matter is, if you look at every race basically that the Republicans have run since 2020, including the presidential, but also the midterms, off-year elections, open seat elections, they have underperformed consistently because most Americans don't like Donald Trump. And you have, in particular, the American suburbs in swing states like the Philadelphia suburbs in Pennsylvania, the Phoenix suburbs in Arizona, the Detroit suburbs in Michigan, these places where women voters in particular, but your general should be voting Republican for economic reasons because they tend to be low tax, low regulation supporters, but really are turned off by Trump. That's where the Republicans really lost a lot of their races. And we've seen it nationwide. So there is a lot of Republicans who are, before last night, really, really worried that they were losing the party and were going to lose the election because the stink of Trump is still a negative for the party. I think the dynamic changes here. They obviously are, they've got Trump. And he's not going anywhere. All the dynamism will be on the Democratic side, yay or nay on Biden. So I don't think we are likely to see any changes on the Republican side. I think he's a flawed candidate, and I think what the Biden people were counting on, and as you pointed out, the reason they wanted to get the debate early was they wanted to go from we really don't like the president to oh gosh we have a choice, and once they had the choice. The thinking was, oh, now we remember how terrible Donald Trump was, and actually this Biden guy's not so bad. That was the calculus. That's why they wanted it so early, to go from we hate the president, we hate the president, we hate the president, to, oh gosh, there's a choice now. And there's a lot of historical precedent to that. Again, if you look at, I mentioned 1984 with Reagan. I mean, he came into the re-election very unpopular, thought he was going to lose to Mondale. And then, because people tend to hate the incumbent president. That's just the way American politics worked. Obama, his re-election campaign did not start out very strong. People just hated the president. Once they had to make a choice, they picked Obama. Clinton in 96, same thing. Came into the election, not very popular, but once people had made a choice, they picked Clinton. So the betting that by the Bidens were incumbent presidents tend to be unpopular, but once presented with a choice, the American people will realize that Biden is better than Trump. And so that's why that was the betting, and it's gone, frankly, horribly wrong.
Well, what matters more to the American voters? The economy, Ukraine, what is happening in Israel and Gaza? Or after all, if they have jobs or enough money to pay?
So all our data shows, because we run our own independent polling with the University of Michigan's school of business, the Ross School of Business, month after month after month, there is one issue that tops everyone list, is inflation. And I think, you and I, as people who follow world affairs, would like it to be differently, and would like issues like Gaza or Ukraine or even China to permeate into the debate. But it's not. It is, people are going to the grocery store, and the eggs and the cheese and the meat are way more expensive than they were a year ago, and someone is to blame for it. Now, interestingly, most of our polling shows that although Biden and the Democrats get some of the blame, far and away, the most blame goes to corporate America. People think that corporations are greedy, and there is some evidence to that because even as inflation has really gripped the American economy, corporate profits haven't gone down, and the stock market's gone up as a result. So there's an old saw in economics, which is that the solution for high prices is higher prices. And what we've seen corporations do is raise their prices even more than inflation and able to pad out the corporate profits. And American people are angry about that. And we're starting to see a reversal now. You start to see some of the restaurants offer $5 meals. You've seen Walmart and Walgreens and some of the discounters really starting to press on their margins. So this is a long way of saying that by far issue 1, 2, and 3 is inflation. It is dog the president. You saw Trump last night really hit the president on this. It's not all Biden's fault, but he did pass a stimulus bill early in his term that economists really believe didn't help the situation. So he is vulnerable on that, and I think it's the economy stupid. I think this is by far the thing that really is going to drive the election. Now, if you talk to the Biden strategists again before yesterday, their hope was to neutralize that issue. If we can say, okay, we recognize things are bad, but you really want Trump, he's going to be even worse, then they could shift the conversation to issues like democracy and rule of law and Trump craziness. That was kind of the strategy. Neutralize the economic issue, which they think is not a winner. They can't win on it, but they can lose on it. If we can neutralize that, then we get the conversation on Trump craziness. That was kind of the strategy. But again, it all really changed last night.
Well, but didn't Biden got well with creating more jobs and having a better economy for Americans? Didn't that work at all? I mean, inflation is everything.
Yeah, no, inflation is everything. And again, you have to remember, it's a big country, right? So yes, the unemployment is low. The GDP growth is the highest of any of the G20. So the macro numbers are good, But if you are a working class guy and your eggs have doubled in price, so who the people who are getting hurt the most tend to be working class and particularly Black and Hispanic minorities, traditional Democratic voters. They are not seeing wages increase. They have jobs, but they're not seeing wages increase where the prices are going up. The same thing with young people. So can't get a house. Housing prices are still through the roof. So it is hitting the people who can't afford it. If you are a middle class or upper class person, the boom in the economy is helping your stock market portfolio. The costs hit, but you're making good money and the economy is humming along for you. That's fine. It is the next level down. Blue collar workers, minorities, those are the ones who are being hit hard. And those are the ones Biden needs to shift back to his side to particularly these swing states, these big industrial swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, to win the election. And that's why the inflation issue is so important.
Now, we've seen what is happening in the Middle East. We've seen with Israel and Hamas, the involvement of Iran and Hezbollah. Now, Antony Blinken goes there, he travels, he tries. Has the American policy in the Middle East failed?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. I mean, look, the problem is whether it's a U.S. foreign policy failure or it's a Netanyahu problem. And I think going back to even Barack Obama and even to a certain extent George W. Bush, the difficulty of American presidents to deal with Netanyahu has been a consistent feature of American foreign policy for a couple decades now. There is a general perception in Washington, certainly in this White House, but in previous White Houses as well, that Netanyahu puts his own political survival above everything else, including in many cases the security of the state of Israel. And there is little contained fury on behalf of White House staffers, certainly off the record when I talk to them, but even increasingly on the record about how Netanyahu is A, treating his most important ally, but B, how he's managing the war, which everyone assumes is just to keep himself in office, because once the war is over, he gets thrown out and prosecuted for corruption. So I think, yes, American foreign policy has in many ways failed, but if the Middle East was easy, everything would be solved. And I think you can't really blame the Biden administration for this. There is a singular stumbling block in all this, and it has always been Netanyahu. There are other leaders in Israel, I think, Gantz in particular, who the administration really is warm to, who they'd love to see as an interlocutor, and it just right now is not going to happen. And so, yes, I think U.S. policy has not achieved the goals it's sought out, but I'm not sure there was a path forward that was going to be successful with Netanyahu as prime minister.
And now, Peter, what about Ukraine and the war there? The United States now under Biden gives money, gives help, gives arms. But do you see an ending of the war when Putin remains as head of Russia? I mean, isn't Putin the problem there also, like Netanyahu is in Israel the problem? Can anyone overcome that? Because even we have a discussion about peace, even with Ukrainians giving up some of their land, but does Putin want to discuss anything?
Well, look, I think you're right, but I guess the question is whether I think our conventional wisdom on how a long war plays out keeps changing. I think initially we were concerned that the West in general does not have staying power. Our politicians and our politics get complicated, and the longer the war goes on, the more the support for the war will go down, and Putin will eventually win. And we've seen some of that. But let's remember, there was an almost near coup attempt in Russia with Prigozhin. So I'm not 100% sure time is on Putin's side either. We've seen this uptick in terrorist attacks inside Russia by the Tajik and Afghan-based ISIS cell. There has been, it's very difficult because we don't have a huge number of reporters on the ground in Russia who can report this out, and obviously public opinion polling is almost impossible in Russia. But there is a clear problem that Putin is facing domestically as the war goes on, and his inability to secure his own homeland because most of the security services are focused on Ukraine. So I think we have to sort of be humble enough to say it is not a straight line to say the West's support is waning. The Ukrainians are gradually losing. Therefore, we'll continue this straight line over the next 12, 18 months, and eventually Vladimir Putin will win. I'm not sure if what we've seen in the last 2 years really allows us to project that way. The fact of the matter is, finally, after way too long, the Ukrainians are getting American weaponry again. The Europeans, mostly goaded by the Poles, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, the Estonians, the Brits, are to their great credit stepping up both with government aid, but also increasingly military aid. So there could come a time when we do see the military facts on the ground change. But I think ultimately, if your question is, do things have to change? Does Putin have to leave the scene for things to really change? I would say yes, but. And we did have a Cold War in which a country like Germany was divided. There's precedent to NATO and the West saying, we do not recognize this, but for the sake of peace, we're going to draw a line here and say, you guys control this and we control that, but it's not permanent, and we will never allow it to be permanent, and there will become a point where Germany will be reunified. That happened for about 50 years, in the middle of Europe. So there are ways short of Putin capitulating and leaving that there may be a way to end the war. I don't think we're there yet, and we need to get the Ukrainians on board on that kind of scenario. And right now, Zelensky doesn't seem like he's heading that direction, and for obvious reasons. But I'm not sure we necessarily have to see Putin leave the scene for something that is in Ukraine's benefit to happen through peace talks.
Well, and my last question is, how much will things change if the Republicans, if Donald Trump is in the White House? That's the question.
Significantly. It will significantly change. I think the problem is, I'm sure your follow-up question is going to be how. And the problem always with Trump is it's almost impossible to know, because the man has no core. He's not a policy guy. He is erratic. He is not a student of history. He's not a student of anything, as far as I can tell. He seems to all we know is he seems to like dictators and dislike allies. He has a bad history with the Ukrainians and with Zelensky himself, obviously, given this strange conspiracy theories he comes up with about how the Ukrainians somehow helped Biden get elected. So it is very unpredictable. It will change, but it's unpredictable to say how it will change. I mean, again, even going back to last night, Biden clearly was trying to say, if Trump is elected, he will allow Putin to take Kiev. And I didn't think those punches landed very well, because Trump hasn't said he'd allow Putin to take Kiev. And we don't know what Trump will do, because he doesn't say what he's going to do. He probably doesn't even know himself until he wakes up in the morning. The other dynamic is, of course, Israel. I think there's an assumption, again, given his term in office, that he was very, very acquiescent to Netanyahu. The Kushner family, very close with Netanyahu, very willing to let Netanyahu do whatever he wants. But there was also some bad blood at the end. And it's not 100% clear to me whether a new Trump administration would be as supportive of Netanyahu as they were the first time around, because again, you don't know what he's going to do when he wakes up in the morning and has something bad for breakfast. He might do something totally crazy. So I think that if past is prologue, what we know is he will be more pro-authoritarianism and less pro-democracy than Biden. And I think that's particularly problematic what we're seeing in Europe right now, with particularly France, but also in Germany, and to a certain extent Italy with Meloni, although she's moderated. You've seen Trump-like figures begin to emerge on the European political scene, Orban being the other obvious one. And to the extent that they find common cause, is the common cause a pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian consensus, which I think would change things significantly.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Always my pleasure.
This was another Eliamep podcast with Οντίν Λιναρδάτου. Recording, editing, and sound editing by Petros Karpathiou. Follow us on the Eliamep channels on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and elsewhere.